Tonight, inflation ticks down, but still higher than expected as prices maintain record highs across the board. Plus,
every member of this body will make a choice.
Senate Democrats push to codify Roe v. Wade into law. Abortion, safe and legal. As the debate over abortion rages on. And TikTok targeting.
This is the #1 app for my generation of Americans. It's where they go to seek their news.
Democrats utilize the social media craze to tap into Gen Z. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
No reprieve from sky-high inflation. Welcome to Faith Nation in Washington. I'm John Jessup.
Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder. High inflation hitting Americans hard. New Labor Department numbers out today show April saw an 8.3% jump in consumer prices from 12 months earlier, including a 0.3% rise from March to April.
Year-over-year numbers from last month are slightly less dramatic than the 8.5% 12-month jump from March, but that likely doesn't offer much comfort to Americans struggling to make do, with no end in sight to the high costs of essentials like groceries and gas. Speaking of gas prices, in fact, they hit an all-time high today, with AAA reporting a national average of $4.40 a gallon. That's an 18-cent increase over the last 2 weeks. This afternoon, President Biden talked about what his administration is doing to try to bring down those costs in the coming months.
And I announced an emergency waiver to allow E15 gasoline to be sold across America during the summer. It's an extraordinary effort, but it had to be done for this summer. E15 uses more ethanol on crops grown here in Illinois and elsewhere around the country. And it can reduce the cost of a gallon of gasoline at the pump by 10 cents per gallon. Every little bit matters.
President Biden earlier this week said fighting inflation is a top priority for his administration.
And for more, we're joined by Greg McBride, Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Analyst for Bankrate. Greg, welcome. So with the CPI falling from 8.5 to 8.3%, some are saying we've seen the peak of inflation. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's tempting to say that, having seen that 12, year-over-year rate tick down a little bit, Jenna. But we've been head faked before. Last August, we thought we were kind of in the same situation where we had seen the peak, and that the worst was behind us, and it didn't work out that way. So, I'm a little bit hesitant. It's only really going to be evident in hindsight. But at this point, even if it peaks, we've still got a lot of high inflation in our future. It's a little like saying winter peaked in January, but it doesn't mean it gets sunny and warm right away. There's still a lot of snow that needs shoveled in February and March.
That's a little bit of a dismal prediction. Greg, CPI core prices rose in April. What all is included in core consumer prices, and what does that rise mean for Americans?
Well, core prices are everything except food and energy. You say, well, why is that? It's not like we don't pay food and energy. Food and energy, even in normal times, tend to be quite volatile, and so they can mask the overall trend in inflation. And so what core does is it looks at inflation without those two items to get a better read. And last month, it was actually a reason for optimism. In the month of March, core prices were only up 0.3%. And that's where a lot of this optimism started to brew that, hey, maybe we're going to start to see the peak pretty soon. This month, core was up at double that pace, 0.6% for the month of April, and pretty broad-based. We did see increases across a wide range of categories.
Yeah. Greg, a lot of people at home are wondering what needs to happen to bring some relief to people struggling to put groceries on the table, to pay for gas. How do we bring down costs?
There's not going to be one panacea. In cycles past, what we've seen is the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, slows the economy. That tempers demand and takes the edge off of inflation. And that may well work this time, but it's not going to solve the problem because so much of this inflation we're dealing with now is rooted on the supply side. The Fed can't broker peace in Eastern Europe. The Fed can't open the ports in China. And so until we start to really kind of see some substantive improvement and sustained improvement on the supply chain, it's going to take that in combination with reduced demand to really put inflation in a rearview mirror.
Greg, early on in the pandemic, we talked about some of your survey analysis that said that savings had been boosted during the pandemic. I got to ask, is all of that being wiped out now because of inflation?
It's definitely being dented. There's a lot of pent-up demand, particularly for things like travel, but we've seen a lot of those costs really go up. Airfare, up year over year, the highest rate since 1980. And so people are having to dig into savings or, in some cases, relying on debt in order to meet expenses or just to kind of maintain that level of spending.
All right. Bankrate's Greg McBride, thank you so much for your time and your analysis today.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
To the battle over abortion, today Senate Democrats trying to move forward with legislation codifying Roe v. Wade into law, but they don't have the 60 votes needed to begin the debate on the issue. Since last week's leaked Supreme Court draft opinion overturning Roe, Democratic lawmakers have been pushing to enshrine access to abortion as the law of the land. Ahead of today's vote, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said that push has led the party towards a more radical leaning of some of the left.
Before Democrats will prove their party has been totally captured by the far left fringe. Today, Democrats have decided to line up behind an extreme and radical abortion policy. Our Democrat colleagues want to vote for abortion on demand through all 9 months, until the moment before the baby is born. A failed show vote that will only prove their own extremism.
And for more on this, let's bring in Tony Perkins. He is the president of Family Research Council. Tony, welcome. So Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer put all senators in a position to go on record today, including more moderate Democrats, some of whom are a little more weary and have some reservations about allowing abortions at any point in pregnancy. Tony, could this end up hurting the Democrats in their overall effort?
I think there's no question, John, that it will, because this is not where the American people are. But the Democratic Party has really been hijacked by the extreme left. And I would add to what Senator McConnell said. Not only does it allow for abortion up to 9 months to the moment of birth, but it also erases all of the pro-life legislation that has been passed and enacted in the states over the last 49 years. This is so extreme that it would mandate, what the court did, 49 years ago, they want to do through this statute. Now, what's very telling about this, John, is that this shows that this whole thing is a ruse. I mean, it's been a court order. It's been a court decision that has given us Roe. And now they're scrambling, trying to use the legislative process. The problem is they've never worked to bring America to a consensus on abortion. In fact, the opposite is true. The pro-life community, using technology, using ministry to women in crisis pregnancies, has really brought the nation to a point now that the court is about to turn this back over to the states, and we're going to see a majority of America being pro-life once again.
Tony, some are saying if Roe is overturned, it will be a catalyst for challenges to other things like gay marriage, access to contraceptives. Are they right on that?
Jenna, I don't think so on its face, but here's what they're concerned about. And they should be concerned that they have made all of their policy, it's really a house of cards because it's by judicial edict. They've never brought America along. In a republic where you work to build consensus, you do this through the legislative process. They've short-circuited that at every turn when they've wanted to advance their radical agenda. So they've used the courts, and so they're fearful of the backlash of the American people when they realize that all of this stuff has not been arrived at by consensus. It's not been arrived at by legislation. It is by court order. And so this is really the crown jewel of the left, abortion. It is kind of the hub of the liberal wheel, and everything else really comes off of that.
To your point about the lack of consensus, Tony, protesters continue to demonstrate outside the homes of justices. Federal law bars picketing a justice's home with the intent to influence their decision in a pending court case. Tony, given your legal background, should the Department of Justice step in here?
John, I think they're too busy going after parents who they see as domestic terrorists who are going to school board meetings. I mean, yeah. I mean, look, the left has a double standard. There's no question about that, where they want to rail about January the 6th, but yet they're allowing and, in fact, refusing to really say anything to tamp down the anger that the left is expressing, not only toward the Supreme Court justices, John and Jenna, but they've firebombed pro-life entities in care pregnancy centers. You know, where is the federal government? I guess they're too busy going after those concerned parents who are going to school board meetings.
The White House said that they don't condone the violence, but they do. The peaceful protesting is okay. All right, Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council. We'll leave it there. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
All right, good to be with you guys.
Targeting the TikTok generation for political gain and winning over young voters with short videos. We explain when Faith Nation returns. And welcome back. From dance videos to cooking tutorials or cute baby content, 1 billion monthly active users tune into TikTok. Tens of millions of them are in their 20s.
Yeah, armed with that knowledge, the Democratic Party has launched a presence on the social media platform targeting Gen Z. David Brody reports on the DNC's latest strategy to prevent a red wave predicted for November.
Today's hot social media landscape has a lot of top contenders: Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube. But the one making big waves is TikTok, with more than 1 billion active monthly users.
Oh, hello. Here's the Democratic message. We want a free and fair election.
A platform where anybody can make short videos and spin current events, politics, and any issue the way they want. Mark Meckler, the former CEO of Parler, lays out the challenge ahead.
The difficulty for the American people is to understand what's true and what's not. We have access to more information than, frankly, we've ever had in all of American history.
As usual in politics, the battle is on to win the spin game, especially among the early 20s Gen Z crowd. They're known to be politically active, and there's tens of millions of them out there. So far, Democrats have a sizable advantage. Given this is the first midterm cycle in the TikTok era, the DNC recently launched on the app, and they're getting more than 2 million views per week. Caroline Levitt is a Republican running for Congress in New Hampshire. At age 25, she is a member of Gen Z and would be the youngest person elected to Congress if she wins. She understands the battleground.
I want your viewers to understand just how significant and frankly dangerous this is, that the DNC is now utilizing TikTok. This is the #1 app for my generation of Americans. It's where they go to seek their news. My generation is not going to go and fact check these videos. We've lost all critical thinking skills because of social media. So the Democrats are capitalizing on that. They're going to continue to brainwash my generation of voters, which is why it is so important that we push back on this.
And while the Republican National Committee still has no TikTok page, the White House is bringing in influential TikTokers to give them talking points on how to discuss things like rising gas prices. 18-year-old Ellie Zeeler has more than 10 million followers.
Why is gas so expensive, and why is the United States inflation rate at a 4-time decade high? I had the opportunity to ask the White House why gas down the street is $7, and here's what they said.
Regarding Ukraine, the Biden administration turned to Aaron Parnas, since he's a powerful TikTok influencer in this area, with live streams that garner millions of views.
For the first 15 minutes or so, they briefed us on what the United States is doing to help European allies. And then the remaining 30 minutes, we were able to ask questions like journalists about concepts that our viewers, or questions that our viewers wanted answers to.
One criticism here is that the White House is engaging in state-run propaganda through the younger generation's top social media platform. Democrats, however, see it as a strategy poised to pay political dividends.
Is that a genius Democratic move, or a Lord help our country movement, a moment, if you will, that the White House is bringing in influential TikTokers?
It is wise of them because they understand that these sites are powerful. They recognize that they are winning with my demographic of voters, and they realize that the Republican Party, our side of the aisle, is doing nothing to change that.
Another complication is that many Republicans are reluctant to get on TikTok because of its connection to China and privacy concerns. That personal data could be stolen. So instead, they turned to Instagram and Snapchat, two other healthy, viable alternatives. But what about old school campaigning? How effective can that still be?
If you don't go on TikTok, you can do this other ways. You have to kind of double up the efforts on other platforms or other ways to get Gen Zers in. In other words, that's the strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Get on all of the other sites and then meet these voters where they are in person, right? There's no more effective campaign tool or no more persuasive method you can win a voter over by looking them in the eyes.
At this point for the GOP, winning over voters on the issues and in-person campaigning the old-fashioned way may be their best bet, because when it comes to TikTok, it's no contest. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
All right, and with that, let's bring in Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan, so we've seen the power of social media in media and in politics. Former President Trump is a great example of that on Twitter. To David's reporting, how much of an advantage do Democrats have here with TikTok as we head into these November midterms?
Well, one of the most basic pieces of an election is meeting voters and communicating with voters. And if you're not on a platform where an entire kind of generation of voters are, then I think that's potentially problematic. Just for some basic numbers, younger voters ages 18 to 29 voted for Hillary Clinton by 18 points in 2016. They voted for Biden over Trump by 24 points in 2020. So Republicans can't really afford to lose any more of those younger voters. At the same time, the platform isn't as important as the message. And right now, even if Democrats are communicating to those younger voters on TikTok or other places, that doesn't necessarily smooth over the frustration or dissatisfaction that those younger voters or all voters are having with the current state of the country.
Nathan, as you're well aware, there were a pair of primary races that were settled last night in Nebraska and West Virginia. The Trump-endorsed gubernatorial candidate in Nebraska did not come out on top. That was not the case, though, in West Virginia or the overwhelming majority of the races where he has backed a candidate. Nathan, you say it's important to put that in context, though.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at the races in terms of Trump's influence on the races that are competitive. For example, last week, Trump's endorsement was important in helping J.D. Vance get that Ohio Senate nomination. He probably would have finished third without Trump's endorsement. I think it helped Congressman Mooney in West Virginia defeat his colleague, Congressman McKinley. The Nebraska candidate fell short. But when we talk about the overall record and how the vast majority of Trump-endorsed candidates are winning, we have to remember that included in that number are, for example, Jim Banks, the congressman from Indiana, who Trump endorsed about a week before the Indiana primary. And Jim Banks didn't even have an opponent. President Trump endorsed Mike Kelly, the congressman from Pennsylvania, for that upcoming primary. He's unopposed. So I'm pretty sure that Mike Kelly did not need Trump's endorsement in that race. So it's important to focus on the competitive races in terms of looking at his influence.
Yeah, another big state, Pennsylvania, to host the next big primary contest next Tuesday. All eyes, of course, on the Senate Republican race, where Mehmet Oz is finally, Nathan, starting to reap some of the benefit of Trump's endorsement, peeling away from David McCormick. Of course, there's the underdog, Kathy Barnett, who's also gaining ground. Could she be a spoiler?
Yeah, this race is getting interesting in the final days, because I think it's clear that while Oz and McCormick have spent millions of dollars each, they've spent that money attacking each other, and that has brought them both down, and voters are looking for an alternative. And Kathy Barnett has emerged as a clear contender in the final polling leading up to this race. But by going up into that top tier comes more scrutiny. And it's interesting to see now that there are questions about her biography and some unanswered questions. Selena Zito, who I don't think anyone would refer to as a liberal reporter, had an interesting article in the Washington Examiner how she's been asking basic questions to the Barnett campaign and not getting some answers. And so where that puts the Republican Party is that Barnett could win this nomination, but then she may end up being a flawed nominee in a state and in a race that Republicans really should be winning in their fight to try to get back to the majority.
Okay, Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks, John, Jenna.
U.S. aid to Ukraine, the latest steps the United States is taking to help the Ukrainian people as the war rages on. And welcome back. Tonight, devastating new statistics over gun violence, marking 2020 as one of the most violent eras in America in decades. Deaths from gun violence surged 35% during the first year of the pandemic, according to the CDC. Overall, over 19,000 people were killed by guns, hitting the highest firearm homicide rate in 26 years. Shooting deaths rose most among youth and young adults ages 10 to 24, representing a 40% increase. CDC data also shows the highest increase in firearm murders among people of color. Black men in that 10 to 24 age range were 21 times more likely than white males in the same age group to be shot to death.
On Capitol Hill, lawmakers are one step closer to sending $40 billion to help war efforts in Ukraine. That's about $100 million per day over the next year. The House overwhelmingly voting to pass the bill late last night.
As Putin desperately accelerates his campaign of horror and brutality, Mr. Speaker, horror and brutality in Ukraine, time is of the essence. That's why we are so pleased to hear that we could proceed immediately with this bill.
If it passes the Senate, money would be used for weapons, humanitarian efforts, restocking U.S. equipment sent to Ukraine, and anything deemed an emergency by President Biden. Republicans who oppose the bill call it a massive slush fund that goes to the State Department. It's been more than 75 days now since Russia invaded Ukraine, and U.S. intelligence warns of no clear end in sight. Russia President Vladimir Putin says he is prepared for a prolonged conflict. And still ahead, a German tradition dating back to the Black Plague makes its return after a 2-year COVID shutdown. And finally tonight, a centuries-old tradition is coming back to life after a COVID hiatus.
During the 1634 Black Plague, Catholics living in a small German town began reenacting the passion and death of Jesus in a live-action play, vowing to repeat the performance every 10 years if God spared them from the Black Death. Now in the small Bavarian village of Oberhammergau, I practiced that, sorry, the show is back on. Some 1,800 villagers, nearly half the town's population, including 400 children, will participate in the play, with around 100 performances taking place between now and October. Jenna, we have to get our tickets and fly over.
That's incredible. The numbers there that you just read off, it's huge production.
Huge production, and it looks like just pretty stunning as well.
Amazing, amazing. All right, that's going to do it for us.
Have a great night.